Nighttime on Still Waters. This is NB 506812, narrowcasting into the night from somewhere on Britain's waterways.
Fifth of March, Thursday. A warm sun that hums with the buzz of big-bodied bumblebees busy among the soft fall of plum blossom. A gust of wind swirls the petals like stirred tea. The call and response between mother and lamb. All is still along the canal side tonight. Hardly a breath of wind stirs. The canal is silent, sleeping gently as a waning moon dips below the horizon. Tread quietly. Let's not wake the slumbering world. And this is the narrowboat Erica, narrowcasting into the darkness of a night in early spring, to you, wherever you are. I'm so glad that you could make it tonight. I've already put the kettle on in the hope you'd come. It's not cold, but there is a damp nighttime chill, so step aboard and come into the warm. The kettle is whistling on the stove, the biscuit barrel is full, and there's a seat waiting especially for you. So come inside and welcome aboard. Things have a habit of happening. Stuff happens. Unexpected, unplanned. So I'm feeling a mite bit underprepared tonight. Or a bit more so than usual. But that's the very nature of life. The wind ravages the nest. Buzzards raid a clutch of eggs. And the next day, we serenade the dawn with the songs of our lives. Ducks flex, moorhens scuttle, and on the topmost branch of the oak a rook watches the world with a guarded eye. A world that is slowly, ever so slowly, changing colour. First come the blaze of yellows, of celandine, coltsfoot dandelion, wild daffodil, cowslip. The pilot lights of spring. "Shut the fridge door carefully," Mum used to say, "or you'll blow out the pilot light." And so I tread very carefully past these flickering flames in case I should, by accident, snuff them out. Although I need not worry. Not even the fiercest blast of winter can extinguish spring's vernal fire. And now the whites are too appearing. Bittercress, daisy, and along the towpath tiny, tight polystyrene balls of blackthorn blossom buds turning slowly white. The plum and damson trees shower the ground with white petaled snow. Under the oaks and hawthorn, the bladed leaves of lords and ladies, or cuckoo pint, are in rich profusion. In fact, I've never seen quite so many along here before. They're everywhere you look, like the slick, thick tongues of great green dogs. There is something regally mythical about them. And the weather, at long last, appears to have settled into a more drier cycle of late. In fact, a few very warm, calm days of blue skies that brought a bustle of bumblebees to the plum blossom gave us our first proper taste of spring, and the chance for the fields to dry out a little. It was nice to feel the warmth of sunshine on my back again. Yesterday, the wind turned, ushering in cooler, damp air that's not cold but has a rawness to it. Something that makes you glad to get inside beside the stove again. And each morning and each evening get perceptibly lighter. The flood tide of spring is gathering pace. Well, as I said earlier, I've not really had much of a chance to sort things out this week. And so I can only really give a couple of quick mentions and shout-outs. Nevertheless, I do love hearing from you, and thank you for taking the time and the trouble to contact me and drop me a line. And it was especially lovely to receive a voicemail from Lee Thomas. It came just a bit too late to be included in the last episode, but thank you, Lee. It was really lovely to hear your voice. And Lee was telling me about her two elderly dogs and how one loves to go on long walks while the other, Leo, is content to stay and smell a scent or a track for 20 minutes or so. And it sounds as if Maggie is certainly a Leo kind of dog. She's okay with walks, within reason, but much prefers to stop and take 15 to 20 minutes delicately sniffing an overhanging branch or a patch on the ground, in which sometimes she seems to literally inhale the soil. And greetings to Rose and Clover over in Australia, and I'm so sorry, Rose, for causing a heart attack with my last shout-out. And a couple of shout-outs over on Spotify. Hello to Squishy Yang. And thank you so much for your comments on Morton's Rise, and I'm so pleased that you enjoyed that story. And greetings and welcome also to Rachel. I'm really glad that you found the podcast and are enjoying it, and it's great to have you aboard. And I was so touched by a recent comment that Mind Shambles made on Mastodon. I loved your description of the podcast as a welcoming liminal space, sitting between nature, story and life, with conversations that are deep and poignant, mixed with tales of folklore, snippets of the past and human experience. And I'm so pleased that all this comes through, so thank you. And over on YouTube, greetings and cheers to John McMahon, and enjoy the brew, perfect lazy Sunday routine. Over to Facebook, first of all, apologies for just not really being around much in the last week or so. And I've been a little behind in keeping things up to date. But hello and greetings to Jason and Karen. Now, Jason and Karen have just put in an offer on a boat and we're waiting for the results of their survey. It's come back and it all sounds good and subject to a few repairs, which is pretty much usual. It all looks set for a start of their new life on the canals to begin in April, so please keep us all informed. It was also lovely to hear from Tracy Brisbane again. Thank you so much for your comment and your thoughts following the last episode, Tracy, and I couldn't agree with you more. Hello also to another Tracy, although spelt slightly differently, Tracy Thomas. Tracy, well done. And I applaud your perseverance. Keep it up. Well done. And hello also to long-time listener and lock wheeler Chris Hines from Salmon Beach, Tacoma in Washington. Thank you so much, Chris, for your thank you note. And I'm so glad that you're still enjoying and finding the podcast helpful. And the photograph that you sent me of the mist across the Narrows was absolutely beautiful. What an amazingly beautiful place you live in. And having mentioned Lockwheelers, a big thank you to all of them for supporting this podcast. And they are Anna McKellar, Susan Baker, Mind Shambles, Claire Hollingsworth, Kevin B., Fleur and David McLaughlin, Lois Raphael, Tanya Yorge, Andrea Hansen, Chris Hines, Chris and Alan on the narrowboat The Land of Green Ginger, Captain Arlo, Rebecca Russell, Alison on the narrowboat Mucker, Derek and Pauline on Silver Fox, Anna V, Orange Cookie, Mary Keane, Tony Rutherford, Arabella Holtzapfel, Rory with MJ and Kayla, the narrowboat Precious Chat, Linda Reynolds Perkins, Richard Noble, Carol Ferguson, Tracy Thomas, Mark and Tricia Stowe, and Madeline Smith. Thank you. A narrow path that threads its way through town and country, city and farmland, often no more than a strip of trodden soil that somehow finds a balance between meandering and straight. Hedged by tall plumes of grasses, reeds, brambles, the tracery of ivy and the hum of bees. A path of many moods and many persuasions, as quixotically liable to change as to defy description. Lush, desolate, dusty, a muddy quagmire, paved, wild and overgrown, popular and crowded, lonely and ignored, shadowed by willows and bulrush, shaded by rusty, derelict spoils of a dead industry, coloured with deep verges of wildflowers, painted vibrant on graffitied concrete. Who knows what the next corner will bring, or where they will bring you? That's the magic of towpaths. Like this one, here. A grey and windy February morning, in a gloomy cutting overshadowed by an oak, and on the other bank an elm. Their branches intermingle so that squirrels can cross the canal without jumping. Towpath side, hazels and blackthorns scramble upwards for light. It's an earlyish Saturday morning, although too late for the dawn chorus. A small group of ducks peck and forage among last year's leaves and this year's bugs. A light rain tries to fall. And the towpath here where we're standing is deeply furrowed and pitted where the winter muds lay thick and slimy, rendering this stretch well nigh impossible to navigate. And enough mud remains to remind you of the turning seasons. And if you point your toes that way, you can carry on walking for nigh on 2,000 miles, crisscrossing much of England, even into Wales, without ever leaving it. Fancy getting away from it all, finding small spaces largely unvisited where the sound of windsong in the poplars and the rasp of raven are the only voices that you will hear. Well, the towpath will take you there. Fancy the pulse and throb of big city nightlife. Keep walking. The towpath will take you there too. Or it will tumble you back through time, taking you to places where the sounds and smells of Victorian industrial power, red-bricked, coal-thirsty, can still be experienced and felt. Or to park-like promenades, crocodiled with pushchair and children on bicycles, and ice-cream-eating young families who stand and watch a pair of swans proudly parade their young to the sound of ahs, and then try to peer through the window of a moored boat and take a selfie beside the bow. Oh yes, keep walking. The towpath will take you to all of these places and more. Oh, so much more. This undersung companion to the canal, this narrow strip of land that follows the course of it, nimbly leapfrogging from one side to the other on sweeping curves of porpoise-backed bridges, slightly diminutive to the lead and green dark waters beside it, there's a feeling that it knows that it's the +1 to a fancy soirée. Happy for the waters to take the lead, to chart the way, and trotting happily, for the most part, beside its big brother, or would that be sister? Without the canal it would not be here. Its whole existence is predicated on this trench of water cut into the fabric of our rural and urban landscapes. Although, is that relationship at last beginning to change? Certainly in a lot of places the towpath has taken the lead, nicely metalled and maintained, even decorated with colourful information boards and signposts. It lends its revitalised, refreshed arm to its elderly sibling, now unnavigable, choked with silt and vegetation, and, in a few places, devoid even of water. For arguably the focus of the main organisation who maintains much of the British inland waterways suggests that the increasing use of towpaths by the general public as places of recreation, education and conservation provides the stronger argument for the preservation of canals. And to boaters it can feel all wrong, back to front, topsy-turvy. It's not the way of things or how they should be done. We're used to thinking about the canal largely in terms of water, its depth, its freedom from restrictions and obstructions and hindrances. And the towpath only becomes part of our world when we stop. The towpath is, after all, in our view, just the canal's ancillary, its adjunct. The canal will remain the canal without it, but what is a towpath without a canal? But then again, there is a sense to it, this shifting of balance in the relationship. And there's a part of me that welcomes the fact that the towpaths are gaining greater recognition for what they do and for what they bring. And perhaps the towpaths are at long last coming of age. I was prompted into thinking again about the towpath this week. It was a comment that Charlie Alice Raya, hello Charlie, made on a post on Blue Sky, where she noted that, having come across a number of boaters who are writers on Blue Sky, she finally looked up what a towpath was. And Charlie made such an important point, because it's so easy to forget that common terms in one world might be totally unfamiliar in another. And from listening statistics to this podcast, roughly a little over a half of our listenership live overseas. And so I'm sure that Charlie is not on her own in not knowing quite what a towpath was or is. So let me explain it a little bit more. In very simple terms, a towpath is the path that lies alongside a canal, and some parts of, but by no means all, rivers. Originally they were called towing paths, which probably explains it a bit better, and it's a term still used by the Ordnance Survey on their maps. However, they are much more commonly referred to as the towpath. And, as their name suggests, their purpose is for towing. During the Canal Revolution that began in the mid-1700s, it was recognised that the traditional form of boat propulsion, sails and oars, would simply not be appropriate. Canals were therefore built with a path running alongside them to accommodate a horse, donkey or mule to pull or tow the boats. There was never any nationwide standard width to them, and each canal company building according to the assumed need, the resources that were around, the geography of the land, and, importantly, costs. This means towpaths, specifically their width, can vary on different canals. The Jerico Wharf Trusts holds documents relating to the construction of the Oxford Canal and records a 7-foot or 2.1 metre towpath alongside the 16-foot or 4.9 metre canal bed. And whilst this is certainly not the national norm, it can give you an idea of the size that we're playing with. And I'd say it pretty much reflects the average ratio of canal to towpath here locally to us right now where we are at the moment. And the Canal and River Trust state that for the towpath, the typical working widths range from roughly 1.8 metres to 3.6 metres, so that's round about between 6 and 12 feet, depending on location and usage. And the key thing was to provide clear and safe passage for the animals used for towing and for their handlers. Towing or towpaths were therefore an essential and intrinsic part of the canal system. Successful navigation and conveyance of cargoes depended as much on a well-maintained towpath as it did on the water and the lock systems of the canal bed itself. To this end, each canal company employed specific workers to ensure that the towpath was clear and properly maintained, and these were called lengthsmen. Alice McGladdery, in her book on Canal Boatman Ancestors, notes that lengthsmen lived in cottages alongside the canal or given the use of a hut to work from that were located on the stretch of canal that they were allocated to. And they were responsible for cutting back vegetation, removing overhanging branches, and cutting back overgrown bushes. Presumably they also had to deal with erosion and subsidence should it occur. Mud, as a lot of boaters today will appreciate this year particularly, is a perennial problem during wet periods, and slippery mud banks not only made towing difficult and slow, but it could also be really dangerous. Over this last month or two, having seen the amount of mud churn caused by groups of walkers and cyclists, and how slippery and difficult to walk on it became, I can only imagine what the state of a path might have been like that received a high level of horse-drawn traffic. The mud, combined with horse droppings, must have made stretches absolutely treacherous. And we do have a number of accounts of horses slipping into the canal, sometimes taking their handler with them. And one account detailing that a person working the horse was crushed beneath them. And tragically, there are a number of accounts of horses and handlers, who were often children, slipping into locks and drowning. The lengthsman's job was therefore crucial to the efficient and safe running of the canal. And McGladdery also observes that they also looked after lock paddles and kept the mechanisms greased. This seems to show that this role was distinct, certainly at an early stage in the canal development, from the lockkeeper. However, the lengthsman's responsibility came to come more and more under the remit of the lockkeeper, and certainly lockkeepers that I was aware of in the 1960s seemed to be involved with a lot of towpath maintenance. Moreover, later accounts written by lockkeepers also showed that responsibility seems to be passed on to them. But I cannot as yet find when that role of lengthsman became obsolete. And having said all of that, following the adoption of motorized forms of propulsion, the need for long stretches of clear towpath was not quite so important. And from memory, towpaths were generally maintained around locks to allow working crews to safely get on and off their boats to operate the locks. and where the path ran close to villages and towns and had become an established pedestrian route, either for leisure or as a footpath to certain destinations. In the late 70s, I often used the towpath as my preferred means to walk from King's Langley, running through Nash Mills and Apsley, and on to Hemel Hempstead and back. It felt much more direct than the roads. And I would sometimes go in the opposite direction and go to Watford, although I tended to cycle because it was a little bit longer. However, I was also aware that there were stretches beyond Berkhamsted and Tring where the towpath had disappeared completely. I remember in my early teens, I semi-seriously planned on riding my bicycle all the way along the towpath of the Grand Union to chick my grandmother who lived in Long Itchington. And I calculated that it would take me round about 2 days, and it sort of posed as what would have been my first real adventure on my own. But it really never progressed beyond daydreams, the main obstacle being that the poor quality of the towpath due to erosion, subsidence and just overgrowth in those less frequented rural sections. I also got the impression that Dad didn't think that it was particularly viable or doable at that point. And with all this, it's easy to think that given the popularity of towpaths among the general public for recreation and leisure pursuits today, that this has always been the case. As I mentioned earlier, like most others, I treated towpaths as I would any other footpath, offering a quick, often short-cut route to a particular destination. However, historically, they were private industrial routes owned by the canal companies for horse-drawn traffic, often requiring permits for access. And I remember Dad telling me of a time when he was a boy going for a walk with his uncle along a towpath. Now, I'm guessing that this was around the mid-1930s, and I think that probably it would have been the Grand Union Canal, as Dad was at that time living in Wembley. And he went on to recount how one of the crew of a passing working boat hurled abuse at them and saying, in no uncertain terms, that they had absolutely no right to be there, something which Dad admitted that they were aware of. Walking along the towpath, he said, was viewed in the same light as walking along a railway track today. And Tom Rolt, in his book The Narrow Boat, writes about how each evening at Banbury the towpath was effectively shut by drawing across it some metal gates and locking them. Even after nationalisation, towpaths were still not public rights of way. The Rothen Group, an organisation involved with canal and towpath maintenance, states that towpaths really only transitioned into public permissive rights of way to walkers and cyclists in the late 1950s and early 1960s, with British Waterways, which was established in 1962, removing the requirement for permit access for walkers. Cyclists, however, were required to purchase permits to use the towpaths up until 2012. And I can remember having a cycle permit myself when I was younger. And now, this undersung companion to the canal is perhaps receiving some of the acknowledgement of its importance that it really does deserve. This long green linear corridor that reaches into the heart of the cities is becoming once more important. And as the Canal and River Trust's recent report, Vital Connector for Nature and People, states, the Trust's 2,000-mile network of waterways, banks and towpaths and hedgerows forms a continuous ecological system running through cities, towns and countryside, reconnecting habitats that would otherwise remain fragmented. As linear corridors, canals, and by inference towpaths, allow species to move across urban and rural landscapes, a role that is particularly important in post-industrial and intensively farmed regions of central England, where natural habitats have been heavily reduced. And so this 2,000-mile green corridor now links 68 SSIs, that's sites of scientific interest, 3,000 county wildlife sites, and includes around 750 miles of canal that have been granted green flag status. And this towpath, here on this gloomy break of day on a windy February morning, will take you there, to all those places and more. It always has. And as long as it lasts and is maintained, it always will. And as we walk, if indeed we do decide to walk and leave this place, along this winding, straight thread of earth and stone, who knows where this path will lead? But one thing we do know, the canal needs the path as much as the path needs the canal. Two travellers, different in nature, happily sharing the journey together. And as we walk, we do it in the steps of all those forgotten people who have worked to keep this path viable. People like Old Willem, lengthsman on the Thames and Severn Canal near Sapperton, captured with such melancholic brilliance by E Temple Thurston in his book The Flower of Gloster. Written in 1910, it's a description of Temple Thurston's voyage along the canals and waterways, starting at Oxford and threading his way down to Gloucester on a working boat, the Flower of Gloster, under the able and watchful service of Eynsham Harry, the boatman, and Fanny, the horse. Temple Thurston was aware that canals and the working boater were part of a disappearing world, left behind by the modernity of steam. And his book is a eulogy to this passing way of life, and it is perhaps deliberate that Temple Thurston chooses to end his book, this record of his travels, with this poignant pen portrait of an old world man facing the future of a new world that is dawning. I looked, and under the bridge, drawing after him a light punt-shaped boat, came an old man with white hair and a soft hat that partially concealed it. "Who is he?" I asked. "He keeps the hedges along the canal in order, trims them up a bit, so that the horses can pass by." "But no barges do come along here, surely?" said I. "We haven't seen one all the way from Sapperton." "Don't say that to him, sir. He goes on working here day after day all year round, and every night he goes home and he expects to find a letter from the canal company telling him he ain't wanted no longer. Don't tell him we haven't seen no barges, sir. He'll ask me first thing, and I shall tell him we see one at Kempsford, that place where the canal runs through the village with a high garden wall on one side and the apple orchard on the other." "That's the last place we came through," said I. "I remember it. But tell me, this old fellow gets a pension, doesn't he?" "He gets it, sir, yes. But he don't spend it." "Why not?" "He prefers working, sir, and this'll be the last job that he'll have." He had come up with us by this time, dragging his boat, now nearly filled with the cuttings of the hawthorn hedges, which no doubt he took home for burning. "Good morning, gentlemen," said he. "Good morning," we replied. Have you seen a barge coming down this way from Sapperton? One, Eynsham Harry replied. Went back from Kempsford yesterday morning. His friend brightened, and not only with pleasure, but with recognition. He remembered Eynsham Harry and sat down on the side of the barge to talk with him. I looked at his face then. He had the clearest and the bluest eye I have ever seen. It might have belonged to a child, yet he was well over 70. Will you have some food with us? Said I. No, thank ye, sir. I've had me a bit a good hour ago. And he pointed to a red and white spotted handkerchief that lay wrapped in a bowl in the bottom of his boat. Well, come now, he continued, taking no more heed of me, but addressing himself directly to Eynsham Harry. He saw a boat. There ain't been one down these ways not so far as Eynsham come the 4th of last month. I don't know what they be going to do about this canal. There gets less water in her every day, and I keep at it, keeping down the edges. But you won't see a bit of horse dung on the towpath, not between here and Eynsham. Well, as long as there's any traffic at all, I interrupted, they won't close it up as long as you're alive. I should be glad to be sure of that, sir. I've written 2 letters to the people at Gloucester, asking them if they thought they wouldn't require my services any longer to let me know, so as I could get work elsewhere, but I gets no answer. Only every week a little bit of money, so I don't like to give the job up. No, you stick to it, Willem, said Eynsham Harry. A horse on the path is better than 2 in the stable. You stick to it. And he nodded his head, fully appreciating the advice. We saw him later, when he had gone away, stopping at a hawthorn bush which overhung the path. He was lopping off the protruding branches and throwing them into his boat. And with that, this is the Narrowboat Harriker, signing off for the night and wishing you a very restful and peaceful night. Good night. Temperature. Outside, 7.5 degrees. Inside, 21 degrees. Humidity, 94%. Dew point, 7 degrees. Wind direction, east. Wind strength, 4 miles per hour. Barometric pressure, 1025.4, rising. Cloud cover, 43%. Cloud ceiling, 40,000 feet. Precipitation, nil. Moon phase, 80.6% waning gibbous. Day length, 11 hours, 18 minutes. Sunset, 17:57. Sky casting, 6:37.